Friends, welcome back to another Pints with Jack Skype session, where each week I am joined by my dear friend, David. David, welcome.
Hello.
Hello. And again, I still have not edited last week's video, so I don't know if I did that right. This time I did give it some thought, though, so I think I got it right. Well, this is where each week David and I come here, and it's different from our podcast. Go check that out if you don't listen to it. And we just talk about something more specific from the podcast. We go deeper into it. And before we dive in, now that David is here, David, let's cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers. I noticed, by the way, David, that I need to have you right up by your... We do this through Skype, and so I need to have your image above my camera, because so often when I was editing them, I see myself always looking to the left, and that's me looking at your image. So this should make it look less awkward, less cringeworthy. But we just finished recording for the last hour and a half a great episode where there's a lot happening with the main character until we have faces, Orwell. And so I want just to get your thoughts. What did you think was the biggest takeaway from this chapter? And let's start unpacking it.
Okay, then. I think the main thing for me is the fact that this is the point when she veils herself. The title of this book is Till We Have Faces, and this is the point when she decides to permanently hide her face from everybody. I think that's kind of important. And in this chapter, we see Orwell take on the persona of the queen. The king is incapacitated, so she starts taking on the responsibilities of the ruling monarch, and she finds that it's a relief from the torments of her memories, of remembering what happened with Psyche. And she even starts speaking of the queen as though she's a different person. And all this is happening at the same time that she's now hiding her face. She's putting up a barrier between her and the rest of the world, and she is now playing a role in an effort to escape her true self.
Yeah, I was going to say, what do you think the veil, let's unpack that a little bit more there. What do you think the veil is hiding?
Who she really is, her vulnerability. Because if she can fulfill her role as queen, then she's doing well. That she's not this scared girl who crossed the gods and managed to ruin the happiness of her most beloved sister. In this case, she is now the successful queen, and as she's doing this, it will distract her from the doors in her mind that she doesn't want to open, and the dam that she's talking about that she has to keep patching up to make sure that the dam doesn't burst, of all the emotions and passions that she's feeling about what she had done to her sister.
Yeah, this is not a coincidence that this retreat that I've been going on for the last 7 quarters, it's very much about the false self, true self. And in fact, this last retreat was very specifically about that. And it actually talked about the Enneagram. We dove into that, and particularly learning about our own Enneagram. Well, anyways, one of the readings that was recommended, not required, was Till We Have Faces. Mm-hmm. And there's a very real reason for that, because this has been a journey of Orwell in her false self, in her true self, and kind of going from her true self to falser and falser and falser. And like you said, we saw in this chapter, she puts this veil on, covers herself up, becomes this new person. And it's a very distinct change. She's wise. She learns how to fight. She learns how to lead.
She stands up to her father, who has pushed her around her entire life.
Yes. And that scene itself was very intriguing to me. I thought there was a lot of wisdom in that as well, because the false self is a defense mechanism.
And you see in this chapter how it works for her.
Yes. And that's what's so tempting about it, because the false self, if I had to put it in a sentence, are the behavioral patterns we develop to either win love or protect ourselves from some hurt or for some shame. That's what she's doing. She feels unloved, unworthy, and she feels shame from what she did with Psyche, and now she's protecting herself. And it worked. And so I'm actually writing a talk right now for when I go to Notre Dame, and it's going to be on my journey from the false self to true self. And the false self I put on, particularly in high school, I actually say at the end of the section, and it worked, but short term,
Yeah,
temperate.
I kind of think of it as like loan sharks, the people that will cover your debt when you really, really need the money. And so it kind of feels like they're coming in clutch. They're doing you a real favor. They are saving you when you needed saving.
Yes.
The trouble is that's only a short-term solution. It's actually just setting up way more problems for further down the line.
And if I had to articulate, and I'll be curious your thoughts too, the big problem it sets you up for in my own life experience is loneliness. If you create this persona, this false self that wins you love, you will only feel like you are loved because of those things. You will never feel like you're loved because of your true self, your authentic self. And in Orwell's case, we start to see this. She's actually starting to be respected, to be feared, to be, in her mind, I would say loved. I put quotations, but she starts to think that way a little bit. In reality, though, she's going to be distancing herself from everyone around her. And that's the danger of the false self.
Because there's always that little voice in your head that says, well, if they saw the real me, then it'd be very different. They wouldn't actually love me. They wouldn't actually respect me if they knew who I really was.
And that's where we are called to bring this full circle as Christians and followers of Christ to recognize. I love Henry Nouwen. He's one of my favorite authors. And I talk about this in the talk as well. He goes home. He says the place of home, which I fill that in with true self, is a place where I hear the voice of God that says, "You are my beloved. On you my favor rests." That's the true self. The self that knows we are loved despite our flaws, where the world says you are loved only if. They're very different. The false self puts the ifs on, earns the love. The true self accepts the flaws, accepts the brokenness, and recognizes we're unworthy and we're still loved.
And inevitably, what you find your worth in, otherwise when you play this role. So Orwell is not always going to be queen. There's going to come a point in her life when she hands over the crown to somebody else, or all of the jobs that need doing are done. Then what's she going to do? What's she going to do when she's in the quiet of the night and has to deal with her own conscience? What's she going to do?
You're literally explaining my journey that I talk about in this talk. I got to a point, for me, my false self was so much success and accomplishments. And I get to this point when I get accepted into the Oxford program, which they would only take like the top. It wasn't necessarily the number one within the major, but a top person from each major and one person. So I get to that. I go to Oxford. And now for the first time, I'm living on my own. And so my false self has been success and accomplishments will earn me love. Now I'm in this new place. I know no one. No one knows my false self. I'm in my room at night all on my own. And I am just depressed. You can't hang your hat on your false self. When you're in the silence and you're not getting the validation of other people telling you, it's done. It's not there. And actually, I pretty much became Bridget Jones from Bridget Jones' Diary with the ice cream. I kid you not. There was so many nights and I'm just sitting here with ice cream, watching a movie and just self-loathing. I mean, it was...
And singing all on my own. I can imagine it in your PJs.
And I always say it was the best of times. It was the worst of times, because that's what triggered my recognition that the false self is not leading to anything I desired, and kicked off, well, my love for Lewis. That's where I met him, metaphorically speaking, and kicked off this journey towards the true self, the authentic self.
And I think it's when, in those times of silence, when you can't run away, that's why we so often try and fill our lives with all of this noise and distraction, because we don't want to sit with our own thoughts. Here in San Diego, once a month, we have a Teze night. We sing Teze chants. But the central part of Teze isn't so much singing, it's the silence. And you can tell when people aren't used to silence, because it's incredibly uncomfortable.
I'm that person. But I'm glad you brought that up, because Henry Nouwen, as I mentioned, with the false self, true self, argues that one of the most important ways to get in touch with your true self and to channel out your false self is through silence and solitude. And he actually uses the Elijah story on the mountain from 1 Kings 19. He said God was not in the earthquake, God was not in the thunder, God was not in the fire. But you know what God was in? The small, still whisper, the small, still sound. There's different interpretations for how that should be translated. That's how you hear the voice of God. The world is loud. It tells you, again, going back to you will only be loved if. Those are loud voices. That's how we leave home. And if we want to return, in the book I'm referring to, by the way, is Return of the Prodigal Son. If we want to return, we need that silence and that solitude. Because when we're in silence and solitude, we watch the false self literally walk by. Those are our thoughts. And we can sit there and we can start to hear the small, still voice of God that says, you are my beloved.
And we don't normally do homework, but if listeners would like some homework for this week, take 10 minutes of silence and see what happens.
It's hard. I have an Apple Watch, and I put it on the 20 minutes thing, and I just kind of sit there and I close my eyes. Oh, man.
And you check it. It's like, oh, a minute went by. Okay.
Yeah, I
Next
know.
time you check it, oh, minute 30.
Between the Examine of Conscience and this, we are giving homework out left and right.
Well, I hope everyone enjoys it.
I know, school's in session. Well, school's in session, but I hear the bell. We're checking out.
Cheers.
Cheers.